Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome to episode 7. I'm lucky enough to be joined by a truly international guest this time. I am lucky to have Linda Febvre from Engie, based in Paris. Linda, very nice to have you on board. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
No, absolutely, Linda. It's been nice to have known you recently. Obviously, we've had a little connection over the last couple of months, and I was really interested when we spoke last time about your career history, etc. But firstly, things have been pretty busy in your neck of the woods. You've had Euro results. I'm not sure whether that's a good or bad result for you being a Brit.
Well, yes, exactly. I have to be very careful what I say in my family because we've got, the people supporting the Europeans, the French and the Italians, and others supporting the English. So, yes, there were a few tears on Sunday night from my sons in particular.
I can imagine. We were just discussing before we started recording that I'm a big cyclist, so I'm watching the Tour de France every night, and Linda has just told me that the tour is going to be passing right by your door soon, so I'm very jealous about that.
Yeah, I'll be out there. We're going to be watching it going up this because there's a particularly steep hill. That will be an interesting one.
Yeah, well, it's actually, just as a bit of a side note, one of the things I find is fascinating is, given the topic of safety on this subject, is that just how, there's been obviously a number of big incidents, one of which we talked about just before, but I still find it amazing. In a way, I love the concept that it is still so original. Like they just ride very fast through streets with no real patrols, and anyone can jump out of nowhere. And in this day and age, every other sport like F1 and so many other sports are so regulated. I find it amazing from a safety perspective that it still gets away with that.
I guess it's because there's no one wants to really, it's a real national thing, and no one wants to disturb the Tour de France. You wouldn't want to be known like that lady recently with her big sign that ended up causing the accident. Everyone's so keen to watch it and see it come through their little village or their town that no one's going to disturb or generally jump in or obstruct it coming through.
Yeah, they're tough. They're tough units, those cyclists. I've got to tell you that much. Yeah. But no, Linda, look, thank you so much for joining me. And one of the things that I wanted to start off with was, a lot of people that I meet in the senior candidates in the safety world have either fallen in or purposely gone in to safety after a couple of years, or in some cases after many years in another functional role or et cetera, whether it be HR, manufacturing, engineering, et cetera. But when I looked at your career, your very first role with KBR was a safety and environment role. What was it that made you choose to go into safety at the very start? And maybe a bit cheeky, but have you ever tried to jump out of the HSE world, maybe unsuccessfully?
Both of those, actually. So no, I did actually fall in because of the fact that, if we really go back, I failed subjects that I wanted to do law with. And then someone came up with this subject called environmental sciences. And I thought, oh, well, okay, well, I like geography and I like ecology and biology and chemistry. And I was sold this subject. So I went and did it. And this was in the 1980s. And I came out and nobody had even heard of environmental sciences or anything. Couldn't find a job, but I didn't want to go home to my small town. I wanted to stay in London. So I took a temping job. And I was temping for what was Brown and Root at the time, not KBR. And basically I was counting the pencils and pads out of the admin cupboard. And then, but I was down with chatty thoughts, and I was chatting one day to what we used to call then the loss control engineers. And the loss control engineers said, oh my God, you're counting pencils. You've got a degree in environmental sciences. We've got a whole load of environmental work. And at that time in the energy industry, it was very much, like structure failure due to the number of muscles on it or oil and water. And he said, come and work for me. And I knew nothing about safety engineering, but I had these few hours environmental engineering, and I just worked up from that, really. I did fall into it, but I fell into it within about 2 months of leaving university.
Oh, that's interesting.
Counting pencils.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, exactly. And then I did leave as well. So I left, and I decided I wanted to school holidays. I wanted to be there more for my parents, yummy mummy. And I decided to do teaching. Probably not a good reason. I had thought about doing teaching in the past, and I did the PGCE, got the degree, and I taught for a year, and it was very rewarding. Taught me a huge number of things about, working together, positive reinforcement, scaffolding individuals, great benefits. And then someone rang me out of the blue, a headhunter, made me an offer I just couldn't refuse. They said, you can come in when you want, leave when you want. You only have to work 3 days a week, and we'll let you have the school holidays off. Could you just come back into the industry, please? And I did.
I was going to say, you can't refuse that one. You know, when you look through your career there, from my perspective, I saw 3 common threads jump out. I saw that the health and safety thread that you've had throughout, you know, the bulk of your career, which is we'll talk about in a second. You've had your international moves, which we'll talk about, and the third one being the EPC, oil and gas, energy side, that industry sector. Out of interest, what has it been that's made you stay so connected to that energy sector over a 25-year period?
Challenges. It's got to be the challenges. There's always something new. The projects. I've also been really lucky in the fact that I've had this opportunity to work in engineering, construction, operation, decommissioning, as well as corporate strategy. And it's unusual for an HSE person to have the opportunity to take on each of those hats. And it's just by chance the country I found myself in. Maybe it wasn't an engineering post, it was more on site. I did rotational, or I followed projects through. And always the new challenges, always very different, different projects, different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds. And so, yes, it was the challenges that kept me in there, and which is fantastic as well, because, you know, that's what, 30 years, 31 years since I started work, and I'm still passionate about my job. And I think that's most important.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and certainly, I mean, just as a search/recruitment professional, you know, whenever you're doing searching for profiles, you know, the one that you always tend to find where there's the biggest bulk of people in any one sector. I mean, there is just so many people that have come from and are in that energy space. You know, some companies seem to have hundreds and hundreds of health and safety professionals in the one business at any one point in time. You know, it's sort of deemed as one of the more, if not the most high risk of all industry sectors. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yes, it's high risk in effect that many of your sites could be, so for Australia, you've got them listed as major hazardous facilities. In Europe, we'll have SPASO, you know, in the UK, COMA. So yes, the risks are there, just as they are. But that's not just energy, that would be petrochemical, any of those risks. So it's a high-risk industry in that sense, but at the same time, due to maybe the number of hard lessons learned, the risk profile and the risk tolerance is far more acceptable. It's got a very robust and rigorous HSE management system that's been put into place. And maybe that is because over the years, you see a lot of people coming out of it. It's because we've had some major accidents. You know, I mean, I went into industry just after the Piper Alpha accident in the North Sea. 167 people died in one accident. And we were shown the video. The minute our induction was to be shown the video of the people jumping from the platform. And it's horrible. And it kind of forms our minds about how we're going to be as HSE professionals. So I think those individuals that come out of the energy industry or work in the energy industry, yes, it's high risk, but it's got a robust and rigorous HSE management system approach and culture.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually saw on LinkedIn just a couple of days ago, was it the Piper Alpha incident? Was that 25 years ago or?
It will be more than that now, because it was 1987.
83 or 87. Yeah, I just remember, and there was a picture taken from the Piper Bravo. And there's
okay,
like,
yes.
yeah, and there's a buoy that's coming above the water, and it was just a very reflective shot that the person made. And yeah, I did some research into it because I didn't know much about that. But you know, it's interesting. You know, moving on to more of your movements around the world, which, you know, having traveled myself and lived overseas, I'm quite passionate about the subject. You know, you've been in, you know, London, Paris, Abu Dhabi. And even more challenging places like Myanmar and Borneo. You know, what experiences and learnings have you taken away from those opportunities you've had to live and work overseas?
Well, I've enjoyed an awful lot of it. You learn a lot. You learn that being in the office and, writing procedures, being at that corporate level, is that it's nothing like being on the sites in these particular areas. Fantastic working with different cultures, with different people, understanding their risk tolerance is very, very different. So, for example, for us, wearing a seatbelt in Europe is just a normal thing. There, because obviously the sites, so for example, in Iraq, the sites are very much spaced out, and so in asking individuals to wear seatbelts, even to drive towards the sites, because in fact, ironically, one of our highest risks in Iraq was due to the fact was actually car accidents, and the notion of wearing seatbelts just isn't there. So you learn a lot about what their risk tolerance is on site, and so you need to think about what you can put into place to ensure that they understand what the risks are and what measures they should be taking and how they should be thinking as well, for example. The same in Myanmar. I was in South Myanmar during the curfew in the 1990s when the country was still closed. So on the one hand, it was an absolute privilege working in South Myanmar. Most of the communities, they didn't have electricity. They would walk 1.5 kilometers to go and get their water. So we put a lot of projects into place in order to help locals, like, for us, boring wells for them, wells in the village. And they were just so lovely to see me. They'd never seen a white female come into the area. And always the warmth that I was set to, it's been fantastic. And it's a great learning experience, I think, as well. You go away with a lot.
So I always get asked, where was your favorite country? I don't really have one. I found them all to be great for great reasons. What about yourself? Is there a special spot for you in terms of maybe linked to your career and specifically to health and safety?
There is, I think there's, so for example, when I was in Abu Dhabi, I was regional manager. So I was traveling a lot. I go to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, lots of different countries. So that was very, very interesting. I obviously loved being sent back to Scotland. As I went to Aberdeen, I was back in my own country, well, England, the UK. I was back there. I loved that. For lots of different reasons, like lots of different countries have meant something to me in different ways. So I can't really say I've had a favorite. I still like going home to London, obviously.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things that when we talked last time, a couple of months ago, you touched on the hydrogen side of things. You're in a senior leadership role in HSE management at Engie. When it comes to hydrogen, is that your specific focus in terms of your scope? And you mentioned it's becoming a really, in the next couple of years, it's going to be a really fascinating area. What's happening in that hydrogen space from your perspective?
Oh, a huge amount. So yes, I'm focusing only on hydrogen, and it's all the hydrogen projects on the international platform that Engie have, of which 2 are in Australia, of course. Yeah. Hydrogen, given the number of subsidies, given the commitments that have been made to the transition and carbon neutral industries, hydrogen is seen as, I'm not saying it's the only industry, the only solution that can fill that space. I don't necessarily think it is, but it will be a huge contributor. And so we are literally seeing in every country and every continent, a number of hydrogen projects are actually starting, whether it be proof of concept or now scaling up to multi-megawatts and even gigawatts of hydrogen.
Yeah, the renewables. I was going to say the renewable sector itself is just, it's just taking off. I was reading an article the other day, and it's such a logical thing to think now, but maybe 10 years ago it was so smart. Was the person who's now one of the biggest billionaire in the renewable sector in China is the person who owns all the battery plants for the cars that they're making for Tesla and things like that. It's like, obviously pretty smart idea, pretty logical now, but it is really fascinating in terms of how that's also affecting, the health and safety world. You've had a really interesting journey with very interesting projects within the energy space. Is there one where what would you say perhaps is your most important work achievement that you've been a critical part of, that you're most proud of over your journey?
I think there's 2. There's one from an environmental point of view, because when we were going through Myanmar, it was actually a pipeline running off of the Adana Sea, so it's the border of Thailand. And it was due to go through primary tropical forests. And that was an amazing experience, because We had the opportunity to go, we were dropped in, and we had the opportunity to walk through the primary forest and, complete with tigers, everything to do with primary forest. And then we went through an alternative route, which was far longer. So it literally sort of went up like this. And that was secondary degraded tropical forest. And based on these studies, based on what we did, we brought in the colleges afterwards, we convinced the project team to take the longer route through the on the secondary degraded forest. Forest had already been logged for teak and was actually quite degraded, and we convinced them to take the longer route, but not to touch the tropical primary forest. And years later, I'd left the company, but years later I did hear that the World Wildlife Fund had actually congratulated the company on taking such a decision. I think that was the environmental one. And in Iraq, I brought in the concept of mindfulness, because we looked at the rotations and we realized that most of the accidents were happening in the first few hours of the flight and the last 3 hours of the rotation, which tends to be quite normal. You tend to see that statistic across industry. We started trying to think about, I know it sounds a little bit, almost sort of remote, this idea of mindfulness, but basically asking people to focus on what they're doing for the first few hours and for the last few hours, and not to be thinking about, oh, what a shame, I'm being back here, I've left my wife and kids or whatever, and those last few hours as well, looking forward to, I'm going home tonight, but to actually stay in the moment, carry on focusing on the job, wait till the end of your shift, then project yourself elsewhere. I think both of those were key mindset and key changes in the industry, which I'm pleased that basically I was part of.
I mean, they were both really interesting stories. That first one is, just that impact, though, that environmental impact that you've been part of, that's actually a really awesome story. You just touched on mindfulness there, and I know that we didn't discuss this prior, but one of the things that I'm hearing about and people just keep talking about is the whole well-being, the mental health aspect of someone's role in health and safety. Are you seeing that becoming such a big topic? I mean, it's always been a big topic recently, but with COVID and the impact of COVID, are you seeing that really becoming the number one agenda over in Europe at the moment?
It is. Oh, absolutely. And certainly within Engie as well, we've had an awful lot of, we had life at risk, and we're looking more at mind at risk as well. And yes, it is well-being within the work. But I also think there's two aspects to it. I think also, certainly within terms of HSE, we need to create psychologically safe environments so that people feel able to challenge, speak, say what's wrong, and there'll be no repercussions or anything like that. So I think that's one of the keys, moving on from this mindfulness as well, but moving on is psychologically safe environments where individuals can express themselves. And I think that's really important as well, and part of good mental health, part of being safe at work.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Throughout your journey, Linda, what has been the biggest positive change that you have seen hit the safety profession?
Oh, it has to be the fact that we've moved away from the policeman role to individuals taking responsibility for their own safety of themselves and the safety of others. Because of course, in the 1990s, particularly after we'd had some major accidents, we literally threw HSE people on site and employed an awful lot of HSE people, and they went around, and the notion was almost that they had to be there in order to do anything, which of course is wrong, because the minute they weren't there, an incident could occur. So there's been this huge move from taking the responsibility away from the HSE individual, or their accountability anyway, and moving it to the individual, and most importantly, the leaders and the managers. It's got to be leadership responsibility, because if it comes through from the top, individuals will follow it, and you cannot expect one HSE person here and there to be entirely responsible for HSE. So that has to be the biggest move, and I think probably the most positive move, which will have the most positive results in the industry.
No, great. You mentioned leadership there, and I asked everybody on the podcast over the last 6 episodes, and now this one, about building teams around you. You don't get to where you are without having great people around you, etc. When you and I caught up a couple of months ago, the subject of leadership came up. I could tell it was something that you're passionate about, which I loved. What do you enjoy the most about that subject, about people and leadership and the development of people? What's most important to you on that subject?
I think for me, it's being able to listen to people. And as I said, it's creating the sort of environment where individuals and your teams are able to challenge you. If you don't just put something into place, you discuss it with them, and they can challenge you. So yes, you need to keep, as a leader, you need to keep your objectives in mind, and you need to be quite firmly fixed on those objectives. But you also need to ensure that those objectives are correct by actually bounding off of your team, listening to your team, and taking on board advice as well. I think that's really quite important. And that's not just about the closest team to you, that's about going out to the sites as well. I'm very passionate about the fact that we mustn't put things in at a corporate or group basis and expect it to be rolled out on site. We need to understand the repercussions on site, why it can or cannot be done, and what can be done to assist the sites in implementing whatever we've decided at the corporate level. So I think listening and discussing with others, and empathy as well, is really important to you.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you, Linda. That's before we go, actually, I was also just going to ask you, because a lot of people that listen to this, so the platform is global, but a lot of people that are listening in are Australian based. We're always interested to hear how other countries and regions are going with COVID. How's everything going in Paris at the moment in terms of cases per day, deaths per day? Are things in control? Because we've obviously just watched the Euro take place, and it's like, wow, they're holding this big event. Then on the flip side, we've got Tokyo, where they're in a stage 4 lockdown again. How's Paris?
Paris is unfortunately back on the increase. So we were actually doing very well. And in fact, it is back on the increase. And our president spoke last night, and we were all there in front of the television waiting for it. And it's been confirmed now. They're bringing in quite draconian for France, actually. It will basically mean that everyone will have to be vaccinated in order to go to cinemas, restaurants, theatres, anything. And that will be from end of July. Well, some of it will be phased in 21st of July and the rest in August. And that's the push to get people vaccinated, because unfortunately, we've had a short spell where the figures have gone down and now they're increasing again very quickly.
Yeah, well, I hope stay safe over there, Linda, and thank you so much for all that. I mean, I really enjoyed our chat, and it's nice to have a guest who's based overseas and give us a bit of a different lens to look through and to talk about. So thank you very much, and all the best with your ongoing career, and take care. So wave to hopefully it's going to be Ben O'Connor, who's currently 5th, the Australian rider for the Tour de France. Have a bit of a wave at the cyclist for me, and at some stage, hopefully we can have a latte down at the Champs-Élysées at some point. But yeah, thank you, Linda, for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
Excellent. All the best, Linda. Take care.
Cheers, then. Bye.
Bye. Bye.